You'd also spoken to little Joe Torrenueva. I'm not sure if I'm
Hmm.
saying his last name properly.
Well, yeah, you're speaking of Joe Torrenueva.
Yeah, yes. And he
Yeah.
was portrayed as when Tom went in for haircuts. He had talked about Charlie Barron and a phone call he'd got from him, and also was quoted with some other stuff. And if you could speak on that a little bit, because you've also spoken to him.
Oh, absolutely. Joe has become a dear family friend, and that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that he's been influenced one way or the other. But I think that Joe has admitted in that he says he doesn't remember saying those things, but if he did, he regrets it and he misspoke. He said I was very close with Jay as a friend, but I had no information on his business dealings. And again, if you're looking at Jay's debt, which for some reason that comes all this debt stuff. At the time of Jay's death, he was worth, what was it, $338,000. $338,960.49. Now that's a value of today's worth almost over $3 million. So and Jay, this whole debt thing, some of it was because of misunderstandings, that some of these friends of Jay's that were giving him money as loans, they were not actually that. They were investing in Jay's business. So with the media, with some of the investigators were sculpting was this guy living beyond his means. And what Jay was doing, he was developing a product line that was organic, pH balanced. And from roughly around late 1961, he was hiring chemists to develop this organic pH balanced entire product line in his own name. That's expensive. And then you got to get it passed by the FDA and what have you or whatever. So Jay was putting a lot of his money back into his own enterprise with the product line, expanding to San Francisco, to New York City. He was going to start open in New York City. And then he wanted to expand to London and Paris. So he wasn't even able to reap the benefits of all of this, what he was doing. And what's interesting is there's a reference to the business dealings kept falling through. Well, it wasn't because they were falling through because Jay was a bad businessman. But there was a man named Raymond Lee, and he owned the Rayette Company. And then Jerry Redding, who did, and he created Redken Labs. Now, these were people who actually had product lines. But when they heard about what Jay was doing, they approached him to be partners. But see, the problem was, and I think that Jay was open to the idea, especially since he had never launched his own product line until now. Once they had numerous meetings in Jay's book. Throughout 65 is when I actually started entertaining the idea of a partnership with Jerry Redding and Raymond Lee. But he eventually did launch the entire product line in 1966, but on his own. Because he realized with all the investing that he did from late 1961 all the way through to the release of the product line, that would be diluting his profit line. So he decided to go it alone. So these are the supposed business dealings that were falling through. Again, in the end, look at how much, and this figure is not random. It was filed with the Superior Court of State of California, and that was it was at the end of '69. So that's the fact. And some people are going to say, I'd be shocked if somebody would say, "Oh, that's all bullshit." Okay, well, there's hard documentation of it.
Right.
Just like there's hard documentation of so many other things. And then when you get into the drug dealing aspect and that bullshit, I spoke with a man named Joseph Gunn, highly regarded in an LAPD, and he's not your typical LAPD guy. I mean, he's very influential in terms of working with commissions, and he also was the seminal. He was almost like the Frank Serpico of LAPD. And I don't know if you or some of your listeners. Frank Serpico brought down the NYPD corruption of kickbacks, and Joe did essentially a very similar thing here back in, I'm not sure if it was the 50s or 60s. So my point is Jay's a straight. Joe Gunn is a straight shooter.
Right.
And so I asked him. I said, you know what? I have no arrest records, nothing, no proof that Jay was ever a drug dealer, any of this stuff. And I said, how likely is it that with all these investigators, the detectives, the attorneys, the DAs, all the reporters, the journalists, how likely is it that this guy is such a prolific drug dealer, the so-called Candyman to the stars, and not one document, not one arrest? He says, Anthony, if not close to impossible, completely impossible. He said, when I worked in narcotics division, and it was around that time, he said, when we would pick someone up and you pinch them, then they start to talk. And he says, it's impossible for anyone who was a drug dealer of substance, when I say substance, and of any kind of intensity, that we hear whispers and rumblings. He said the entire time I was in narcotics, I never heard the name Jay Sebring. And so, I mean, these are some of the different things that it's like, why is it for all these illicit, crazy characterizations of Jay, why is there no facts? There's not one definitive proof of any of this. And again, this goes back to when I talked to Tom, and I said, man, if you don't have anything definitive, it's all for naught, really. And I wasn't hoping that. Listen, if Tom uncovered that someone was involved that needed to be held culpable, I'm 100% in, because they need to be brought down. They need to pay justice. But when I see the final product and it's a whole different thing and it's sculpted to fit a narrative, especially when it's, again, this is my opinion, it defames the victims. I mean, come on. And, when we were talking, I interviewed a man that was a good friend of Jay's. And his father later became Jay's attorney, Alvin Greenwald. And Paul Greenwald was a young guy and a friend, and he said he considered Jay to be like a big brother, and that he helped wire Jay's, because Jay was cutting edge with a lot of stuff. He wanted high-five stuff, and he loved having like gadgets that he could like turn on lights in the backyard or make the curtains move, or be like almost like a control panel at his bedside. And Paul helped wire all these things. So when I interviewed him, and I forget the exact date, but it was pretty early on in our interviews for the documentary, he revealed that on Thursday night, Jay had called him and said, hey, I'm having some trouble with the TV or the light, something. And that he had mentioned that Jay was at his house, and Sharon, Abigail, and Wojtek were at his house the night before. That would be Thursday night, August 7th. So he said, can you come over and kind of take a look and see what you can do? And he says, no, I got plans, but I can come over maybe over the weekend and fix them. And he says, okay, great. So then the next day, Amos Russell was staying at Jay's house. Now, this is interesting because Amos Russell worked at Jay's salon, and he also Jay allowed him to live upstairs rent-free at the same space. So Jay had hired Amos to paint the exterior of his house. So Amos, it was going to be like a 4-day thing. So Amos was sleeping in Jay's guest bedroom. So Amos was there, and so was, Sharon, Abigail, and Wojtek when the phone call happened. And then Amos had corroborated in his polygraph that they were having dinner and that Jay and his friends were watching TV in the bedroom. So Paul, he learned that Jay was killed on Saturday morning. And then, of course, there's all these news reports, and they really were hitting the whole thing about the telephone wires being cut at the Cielo residence. So then he was asked by, I think from his father, because my grandparents had asked if he could maybe get a suit for Jay to be buried in. So he went to the house on Sunday, I think it was. And as he did, he remembered Jay saying something, or that he had problems with TV or wiring or something. So when he was there, he went to the back of the house and he saw a wire that had been severed. And because of what Jay said, the call on Thursday, and then seeing the reporting Saturday morning with cut wires. And then he said when he looked at it, it was a bright copper, meaning that he assumed that it was cut recently. So he had said in his interview, he thought that possibly, because the same four people, 2 different nights, at 2 different locations, and wires were cut, that they were targeted. Now, he said this, and I said, well, why? What? And he didn't have an answer. So then I called the man who lived at Easton, Jay's former residence, and I said, hey, I'd like to do a follow-up. Can I do some follow-up filming in the backyard? And he said no, because we'd been there 2 or 3 times already, and I think he,
Yeah.
So he wouldn't let me. He did not give me access to film it. So I was going to have Paul show me everything that was going on. Now, Tom and I had been talking about the wires, and he brought this to my attention, and he didn't know that I knew, but I did know. And I wanted to, figure out what, if anything, if there was any ulterior circumstances. So anyway, eventually, I don't remember what happened first, but I was going through Jay's personal collections, and I found a note. I think it's dated February 21st of 1969, and it's from Paul. And he says, Jay, essentially he says some pleasantries and things. And he even mentions, the exciting news about New York, about opening the shop there. But he goes and he says, I'm sorry to hear about the backyard lights. I'll fix them when again, I'm paraphrasing, I'll fix them when I get back into town. So that was sent. Now, the curious thing is, why would Jay save that note? Now, I mean, obviously, if the lights were fixed, you could just toss the note. But why did he save that note? And maybe even a secondary possibility is because it was meant to be found.
Yeah.
So there was no mention of the wires in the book, as far as I know. I didn't really read exhaustively through it, but I don't think so.
No, they
weren't. Then Tom started. Okay, so then Tom started telling stories on all these media platforms, saying that somehow, because of these wires, that the victims were targeted, that the killers knew their victims. Well, shit. I'm like, man, going back right to the well. I mean, so now I have the letter, and I know definitively that somehow there was problems with the wires from February. So then when I'm seeing this stuff pop up all over the internet, and now everybody's going back to Jay's a drug dealer, Wojtek, and this whole targeted MK Ultra conspiracy bullshit. But again, you have to malign the victims, and there's no one to defend them. They can't speak for themselves. So I'm seeing this shit, and I'm going, again? I mean, and it's getting on platforms that are some of the biggest platforms, and now you got all these people thinking that they were targeted. And it's like, motherfucker, is there no end to this bullshit? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, come on. And so, and the thing is, I saw one of the podcasts, and Tom describes things as if that's what happened. All of a sudden there was a flash and a thing, and it's all dramatic and blah, 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 blah. Well, I know for a fact. Now, I don't know what Paul said to Tom, because evidently he might have been interviewed. I don't know. But I know what he said to me. And he merely was hypothesizing what could have happened if somebody in the backyard that night clipped the wires and the lights had to have been off for there to be a Christmas tree-like burst of light in the backyard that he thought might have spooked them. But no one described or ever confirmed that anything like that happened. So in my research on this, because now this is yet another kind of sensational exploitation of things, I need to know the truth. So I followed up with Paul, and I find him to be a very credible man and a good man. And so I started asking, hey, is it possible that the wires were cut around the time of this note? And he said, of course it is. And I said, well, why did you think that it happened that night? He said, well, because Jay called me, but also the vibrancy of that gauge, the copper of the gauge. And he goes, most wires were a double wire, but this was a thicker singular wire. So I asked many electricians if, by the way, logistically, the wire was only about a foot to a foot and a half wide, and it went from the exterior of the house, roughly about 8 to 10 feet, to the eave of the backyard that lit up all the backyard lights. So, however it was severed, it remained suspended in air, and it was in a very remote area of the house. So there was no water, no sunlight, and no rodents. It's not like these wires were like laying on the ground. Okay, right. So every electrician that I talked to stated that, especially if it was a thicker gauge wire, that it's very likely, if totally likely, that it would maintain that kind of brilliant copper tone, considering, again, the kind of isolated conditions and everything.
Right.
So now we have that, and then I listened to Amos's polygraph again. Now Amos confirms that Jay and his friend and everyone were watching TV that night, Thursday night. Then he says after he painted what he did Friday, he turned in and watched the TV. And then he says later that he was watching the TV in the days that followed. So there's no TV reception lost, but Tom, I guess, says there was.
Right.
So when I asked Paul, I said, Paul, is it possible that the wires were cut in February? And I said, also, you said in the note that you would fix the wires. Do you recall if you ever fixed the wires? And he says, Anthony, no, I never fixed the backyard wires. As a matter of fact, I completely forgot about this and even the note until you just sent it to me. So this is hard copy evidence. This is proof corroborated by two different individuals that the wires weren't severed the night before. It completely did not happen. And yet, there's a link that was posted on YouTube, and some guy was so livid that he's like, oh, this is crazy. It's a hack. I don't know what he was saying, but I couldn't understand why you're buying a story that has no definitive proof or hard evidence. Meanwhile, this reality does, and you're lambasting that. Why? So, I guess with all of these different things, it's just kind of, I don't know. I don't understand why so many people are hell-bent on consuming shit.
Well, it was pretty poignant in the documentary. Bobby Beausoleil had said, he when asked about why he thinks there's so many stories and why it has so much staying power, he said people just want their fantasies. They just they want it to be true, really bad. And why? I can't imagine why it would be so personal to people that don't really have anything to do with it.
That's exactly right. And I think that Robert Beausoleil, I've been to like 3 of his parole hearings. And I did listen to another podcast that he did. And I have to say, there's been some things that, in either in an impact statement or with some correspondence with CDCR that I've taken issue with. But in the one podcast, and again, I haven't seen the film, the Chaos film, he actually reveals some things, and one of the first to actually do it, and that is to really go beyond the fantasy and the narratives that suit people's needs, because he starts to address what really the Manson family was, which was a criminal gang. And if we base our understandings of these events, again, that have cultural implications and are historical in nature, if we see them through the prisms based on false premises, then there's all kinds of daylight for, conspiracy and a mob and MK Ultra, CIA, and I think I mentioned this, that maybe even the Martians were somehow involved in these murders.
Yeah.
And do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if it's a hippie cult, anything could have happened. How do you get these homecoming queens and football players and secretaries to go out and kill people? Well, first of all, they're not a hippie cult. Second of all, they're not indoctrinated or duped. It was a crime gang, and really, when you look at them as a crime gang, everything makes total sense. And the catalyst, the defining moment, was the drug burn of Bernard Crowe, upwards of like $2,700, which it's a hell of a lot of money by today's value. I don't know what it would be, 27, 30,000. I don't know what it was, but it was a lot of
somewhere
money.
around there is a lot of money.
Yes, and so when TJ, I think his name was Wellman, and
Walleman, TJ Walleman.
Yeah, TJ Wellman and Charles Watson, they burned him on a shitload of money. Well, now Bernard Crowe calls the ranch and says, I want to talk to Charlie, meaning Watson. So Manson gets on the phone, and he's like, I'm coming for you, and I want my wheat, and I want my money. I don't know what he said, but it's along those lines, or I'm going to wipe you all out.
Right.
So now Manson shits his pants. So he's like, hey, TJ, you put us in this fucking bind. You gotta clean this up. You gotta clean up your mess. So he gives him the gun. They go to Bernard Crowe's apartment, and with the premise, or no, with the notion that they're going to give him his stuff back. Well, they don't. And TJ shits his pants, freezes, and then Manson pops him in the stomach, and then Bernard Crowe collapses. Now Manson thinks he killed a Black Panther, and now he's really freaked out that the Black Panthers are going to wipe him out for the drug burn and the murder of one of their own. So now they're in desperate need of money as well. So Beausoleil had actually slept in Gary Hinman's basement, rent-free, for months. So Beausoleil knew Hinman quite well, and Hinman, partied and did different things with the family, but on a recreational way. And so Manson, that was one of his ploys. You hang out with us, you hang out with the girls, you do, drugs, you owe us. So they extort him for money. It goes south after 3 days of torture, and then they kill him. Well, what do? They try to frame the Black Panthers by putting paw prints in Gary's blood on the wall and writing political piggy. So the notion, there's this mutually exclusive bullshit way of seeing things with these murders and with other things, but it's right now, this whole mutually exclusive thing is ridiculous. Was this just to cause a race war? Hell, absolutely not. Was it one prong? Maybe. Somewhat, yeah. Possibly. I mean, if you look at what was happening in the 1960s throughout America, there was a lot of racial strife, and there was, and Manson had a hang-up about African Americans. He had a hell of a lot of hang-ups, and probably for good reason. But the point is that, so there was this notion. I mean, but when they thought they killed a Panther, they wanted to get the heat on the Panthers from law enforcement, so that they wouldn't come after them at the ranch. So this had racial components, but more so the result of a drug burn and murder, in which obviously Manson did not kill him, but he thought he did. So that's what sparked the whole thing. So the fact that there's political piggy at the Hinman crime scene, and then you got pig at the Cielo crime scene, and now you got death to pigs at Waverly. Clearly, they're trying to frame the Panthers. So this is total criminal motive and intense.
I have a quick question. Sorry to cut you off, but I have a question for you. What do you think of the of them saying they were trying to do copycat murders to get Beausoleil out?
That's 100% accurate, completely accurate. And if you, I pointed that out at this last parole hearing. That's from Beausoleil's own words to Truman Capote back in his interview with Capote, I think it was in '72, and it's corroborated by Susan Atkins. Now, that's another thing. Susan Atkins was with Beausoleil at the Hinman murder. So, and she said that the whole thing was a copycat thing to try to convince the police and the law authorities that they had the wrong guy. Those are direct quotes. And so, not only what do I think about it, it's completely, again, it's the criminal mindset. And that's part and parcel what's going on there. So completely, and from the words of the people who were doing it. And so then when you go back now, we're going to revisit the whole CIA, fucking MK, whatever they're all bullshit. And now you're going to go back to that, and you go, wait a minute, no, it's that. I mean, you have the people who committed the crimes who are actually saying what the motives were. And then if we're gonna let's say I'm gonna keep lapping up that shit, but I'm gonna stay with the CIA stuff. Well, how likely or possible is it that for over 50 years, with all the reporters, all the writers, all the law enforcement, all the killers in testimony, in their parole hearings. Now, I forget how many now, not now, but how many people were involved in all these murders. Not one slip-up. Not one slip-up in which, I should have said that. We're talking about parole hearings, the way the murders happen. It's all pretty much the same thing, by and large. Are there some disparities and some, contradictions? Yes. There's plenty of that, but those are like not the big overarching things.
Right.
And so I think that for someone who's going to hold on to these desires and these myths, again, if you look at things at face value, it's laughable. Like, how is it that nothing and that no one found anything? And yet, the book, and Tom has admitted it, there's no direct connection to any of the things that he's alleging. None. And yet, in the Wire story, I have, and that's just one of the yarns, there is hard copy evidence. There is definitive corroboration and evidence that completely upends and obliterates that whole fantasy of the wires being cut and the victims being targeted. Meanwhile, all these people on the internet are saying that they were targeted, so now again, this is further character assassination of the victims. Disgusting.
Right, and man, you really lay it out on a level that it's tough to twist around, and it's shocking that with the info you have, the hard copies, which some of the stuff I've seen, and your firsthand knowledge of all this stuff, that it could be turned around so many different ways without it being intentional.
In terms of, what do you mean by that?
In terms of
intentional.
The story being twisted into something to make money, like Chaos or Helter Skelter or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The millions of books and movies and songs. And what I was really shocked about is if you go on to a music streaming site and you hit any of the keywords, the names of any of the people, the crimes themselves, there are hundreds of songs. Hundreds based on this, and it's overwhelming, and I can't imagine, like you were saying earlier on, how it's just being rubbed in your face all the time, and it's actually your family that this has happened to.
Yeah, and I think you make a poignant point, and one of them is that I needed to know the truth. And I wanted to know if there was other people and this, and that. And when I read that my uncle was a coward, that he was a creepy pervert, that he was a drug dealer, that he was anti-Negro, I thought, what? That's not even my family. Like, what? Where is this guy? Listen, I don't know anybody in my inner circles that's any one of those things, let alone all of those things. And evidently Jay was all of those things. So I had to go down the line. And again, it's like when you say getting punched in the, but this keeps coming up. It's one thing, and I told myself, I got to know the truth about my uncle, even if I don't like it. Right. And I prepared myself to learn these things. But as I did, I was learning the exact opposite. I was learning that all the things that they were saying about him, and again, this is not my wishful thinking. This is just definitive. Okay, you say he's in massive debt. Well, how much was he worth when he died? And that's before his business returns and his product line and all his expansion came back. But it never did because he was killed before his prime. And then they say, he was anti-Negro. Where in the fuck did they get that? His inner circle friends were Quincy Jones, Sam Cooke, Sammy Davis. When Sammy Davis and My Britt were getting death threats because of the interracial marriage, Jay would go to their house and cut both their hair. Jay was he backed Hedgeman Lewis, a really great fighter from Detroit. And he advocated for Rick James when Rick James was trying to get his start here in Hollywood. It's like Bruce Lee, he was some guy in Oakland, and I'm not saying guy because that's disparaging, but he's just a young guy that was very talented in martial arts. That wanted, his dream was to open dojos with his Jeet Kune Do stuff. Well, Jay discovered him, and he launched the career and was a stylist mentor. And this is not my opinion. This is Linda Lee's opinion, Bruce's wife. But Jay literally launched and endorsed for Bruce Lee at a time when white Hollywood didn't think Asian actors could play Asian characters. I mean, it's absurd. And meanwhile, Bruce goes on to become one of the biggest global film icons in history. And this is a man who was the opposite, if you could ever be so disgusting as to say he was anti-Negro, or he was a racist, or he was a coward.
Right. Not to mention he had Amos Russell living at his house.
Well, that's an interesting point too. He didn't have Amos living at his house. He slept at his house when he was there, either when they partied, there was a party in 1968, or when he was paying out, but he certainly let Amos live rent-free at the apartment above the shop. It was also a private room, but it was a fully functioning apartment. So yes, and Amos, and by the way, Amos, the fact that that Bugliosi characterizes Amos Russell as a live-in butler. Jay never had a butler. I mean, it's such hogwash. I mean, what was he running around in tails with white gloves and shit? It's like so insipid. And Tom parrots that in his video with the wires. He says, his butler. Amos was a friend, and Amos would be the first person to tell you that. He loved Jay, and I mean, it's just like all the. And then if you're going to say that Jay was a coward, all the corroboration of what Jay did in the last moments of his life, he charged Charles Watson with a gun and a bayonet amidst two other people with hunting knives at a moment when he had his back turned. It's in the testimony. It's in the evidence. At one point, Watson said that he turned and shot at the man running after me. If you look at Jay's left knuckles, they're sliced perpendicular to his knuckles. He was throwing a punch, but it was shot through his armpit, which was immediately piercing the lung, fatal. But he fought, and he fought a second time. A second time that forced Watson to start stabbing and kicking Jay in the face, which allowed Wojtek to run through the front door and Abigail to run for her life through the back hallway out the back door. But why didn't Bugliosi put that in his book? Because Bugliosi was the hero of his own true crime novel. And if he were to ever put in what Jay did, those defining moments in his book, Jay becomes the hero. So what happened? Jay's the fall guy. All of that is omitted from his book. All of it is flushed, swept under the rug, really.
Right.
And it's interesting, when I talked briefly to, I actually spoke to Quentin Tarantino. If I was concerned that these murders would be glamorized, the killers glamorized, and the victims marginalized and exploited. And I found Quentin to be a very stand-up, noble guy. He really, I mean, obviously I have high expectations of him as a writer, director, but I had no dealings with him personally. And we had maybe three meetings, including an interview that he did for the documentary. Extremely noble, stand-up guy with a lot of integrity. But he told me, in this, he's like, hey, Anthony, I don't want to do I'm not interested in the murders, and I'm not gonna, and then he was kind enough to say, how about you sign an NDA and you read the script? Because he cared. He saw where I was coming from. I wanted to protect my uncle and his friends and all the victims. And I was so touched by that. But he says, I'm not even into that. And I said, Quentin, I wouldn't mind if you did, as long as you tell the truth. Tell the truth. But because Vincent Bugliosi didn't tell the truth, and Jay deserves it. Paul, if you did what Jay did in the last moments of Jay's life, against all odds, you and your family would deserve to have that be known.
Right.
But instead, they shit on it. And that is irrefutable. Those are the fucking facts. And if I sound like I'm pissed, I am a little bit. But you know what? I'm so grateful. I'm so proud of my uncle. Of what he did throughout his whole life. And even, I mean, he was a fighter. He was a rugged individualist, as Charles Chaplin referred to him. He did. He clashed with his father because he wanted to do his thing, and he was a dreamer, and his father was an authoritarian, a disciplinarian. And then he fought with the Navy and, you know, got in fights with the officers and all that stuff. And, you know, and then he fought the barbers' unions and the movie studios when they kicked him off the lots. But he won. And then, even in the last moments of his life, he fought against a horrific evil, completely unarmed. But why do so many people not know this? And why have so many people swept that under the rug? That is something that I'll never understand. And frankly, if we look at all those realities, it's much more interesting. The truth is so much more profoundly relevant and interesting than any of the fucking bullshit that's being promulgated today and for the past 50 plus years.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you being passionate about it. I don't see how you couldn't be. One thing I've said throughout this is it's a totally different ballgame for the families of everyone. We're looking at this from the outside. Like, there's real people behind that. There's real feeling, and and you purvey it very well.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but it's just the truth. But I have to say, I go back to all these things, and I know, obviously I've learned so much, and I've seen what all the victims went through. I mean, this was unspeakable, horrific things and stuff. Or not stuff, but realities. And like so many people say, "Oh no, there were worse crimes." Well, is that even an argument? I mean, I don't even know what that means. But no, I don't. I think this is among the worst crimes, and it doesn't matter. I don't believe in this false correlation. That's not necessary. But these crimes were off the charts, and so many other crimes are off the charts.
Right. It's not a contest.
No, exactly. But the thing that is, again, it's part of why we're talking right now. It's because they're being slaughtered again. Like, they're being slaughtered just as much now as they were after the murders. And it's not changing. It's actually gaining weight. Like, when you have some of the most powerful people, public figures, endorsing all of this bullshit, and it's astonishing. It's like you're too intelligent for this. And why are you promoting this type of exploitation? And if you look at just the basic realities, the common sense realities. When I say that, I mean like okay, Jay is worth almost $3 million by today's value. He spent so much of his life, creating his industry. He's passionate about the people in his life and elevating their lives. Why in the hell would he even engage in drug dealing? Now, sometimes you have people that defy logic, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the case here, and there's no evidence. And like I said, I was prepared to know the truth, whether I liked it or not. And if it were true, maybe I wouldn't have done a documentary, because maybe there wasn't a story to be told. Maybe he just was those things, but it turned out to be the exact opposite. That's a story. And it's not a story, it's a real story. And again, I appreciated when you first reached out to me. And I think it was is it because, I forget what, did you see the documentary or?
You'd sent me an email about the cut wires. I think we got hooked up that way. And then,
okay.
But when you reached out to me, I was like, I had to take the opportunity of speaking to you to really to be remorseful for how I'd acted in the beginning. Like all the people you say, it doesn't feel like a real thing. It feels like entertainment fodder. And
Yeah.
like how I got into it was I read Helter Skelter, and then right after it I read Chaos, and I was like, holy cow, like, you know, you just get sucked into it. And you were so gracious to accept my apology, and to not just be like, well, you know, fuck this guy. You know. And and so I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you putting forward all this information with backing paperwork that I'll put out along with our conversation here. And I hope it helps in some way. I hope that I can, you know, make up for my mistakes, and that, you know, you can get the true story out there, the story your family hasn't gotten a chance to really put out, because everybody just seems to twist it into a way that's going to make them money or entertain or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and again, yeah, I appreciated your sentiments that you know that we had exchanged as of late, and so I appreciate that. And then, you know, like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, I did see a bit, because you know, I'll look at things and see what's going on and what people are saying, and you know, I was turned off when I saw some of the podcasts or some of the things that you guys had done in the past, and I you know, I'm just being as real and candid as I've been this whole time, because there's no reason to be anything other. But I also feel that there's something worthy of your integrity and whatever realization that you have, because I think that is part of something that is relevant in all of this. But it takes certain types of people who are able to manifest that, you know. But I also, in all of this, I think it's interesting because, you know, these murders have profoundly impacted our family, as one could imagine.
Right.
But I also have to say that I'm so grateful to my grandparents and parents, because they taught my family, my sisters and I, and all of our family, that Jay is larger than any of this. Who he was, what his spirit is much larger than any of this. And he would, if he could talk to us, say, hey, yeah, you can mourn, and you know, what is naturally a natural process of mourning. But you know what? Life is for the living. Go out and live life with the zeal, the passion, the integrity, and the high quality in which I lived. And I'm grateful for that, because that comes with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And these murders, as much as they've impacted us, they've not defined us. And I've seen other people in various walks of life with different things, where tragedies or, you know, misfortunes, it defines them. And I'm just grateful that, you know, the spirit that my grandparents and parents and Jay, because I think Jay is part of this. I really do. And I believe in energy, I believe in synergy, and I believe in science. And so I don't know, you didn't even ask about that, but I have to say that is something that's really important in all of this, because, you know, like in the documentary and also with the book, and, you know, Jay's spirit is kind of like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and the ashes, you know, are all the different things that have been promulgated, and yet, you know, anyway, I guess it's just kind of a thought. That's why with the book, I worked with a man named Marshall Terrell. He's a biographer of Steve McQueen. Well, he's actually a biographer of like Pistol Pete Maravich and so many jazz artists and different people. So yeah, he's like really phenomenal. But it was interesting how that came about. And when I reached out to him, it's like I was trying to get Neil McQueen or Chad McQueen to do an interview for the doc because, just like Bruce Lee is a chapter, Steve McQueen is too, and so many different. And so I just, for whatever reason, I was kind of like jumping through hoops, and I thought, it's been working organically. So I found out that he was like a Steve McQueen aficionado or whatever, authority. And so I reached out to him, and he was great. He said, I told him what I was doing. I asked him to do an interview, and he says, in my research, I've always thought that Jay's story was just as interesting, if not even more so, than Steve's. And he goes, if you would like to do a book, I'd like to do a book. And I said, well, that's really great. Maybe we can do that, but what I'd like to do is interview you. And he says, well, I have a film option on McQueen projects, and I can't, conflict of interest. But let me know when you want to do the book. And I said, well, I too have a conflict of interest with the documentary until that's released. And I had no idea that it was going to be, I don't know how many years it was, but upwards of 15, 17. We started filming in late 2007, and it was released in 2020, but I was researching for years before that. Anyway, and so he said, I'd like to do a book whenever you want to. And so then the film was released, and then we reconvened, and we're doing this book. And there's some things you can do in a book, an extensive book, that you can't do in a feature-length documentary, and vice versa. So this book is going to delve into extensively into Jay's life, death, and legacy, but also some of the realities with the fight for justice, parole hearings, also the distortion today that is just as pervasive, in some ways, maybe even more so today than it was even 50 plus years ago. So I appreciate that, but it's an ongoing thing. Right. And hopefully it'll resonate with people who normally it wouldn't.
I think that's great. I think it's awesome that you're doing it. And I totally agree. You've got the book to accompany the documentary, and they'll complement each other really well, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I want to thank you very much. If there's anything else you want to say, for sure, but I'm sure we'll do this again after the book comes out. And I really appreciate all of the time you've given and the patience you've had with my incessant questions.
No, not at all. I thought you asked some very great questions, and I appreciate you and kind of what you've expressed and shared in the journeys that you've gone through, and also what we've discussed just as of late. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
well,
right.
Thank you, Anthony, and we'll definitely talk more about this stuff soon.